It became one of the most divisive conflicts in American history, a war fought in dense jungles thousands of miles away, yet one that tore apart American society at home. Nearly 20 years of conflict, millions of lives lost, and a superpower forced to confront the limits of its own military might. This is the story of the Vietnam War.
A like helps the channel grow. Your subscription helps keep history from being forgotten. Colonial roots. France and Ho Chi Minh. Vietnam had been a French colony for nearly a century before conflict erupted. During World War II, Japan occupied Vietnam, temporarily displacing French colonial control. Ho Chi Minh, a communist nationalist leader, led resistance efforts against foreign occupation. Following Japan's defeat, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnamese independence in 1945. France, however, sought to reassert colonial control over its former territory. This led to the First Indochina War between French forces and Vietnamese nationalists. Ho Chi Minh's forces, known as the Viet Minh, employed effective guerrilla warfare tactics. In 1954, Vietnamese forces achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. This defeat forced France to withdraw entirely from its Vietnamese colonial territories. The subsequent Geneva Accords set the stage for Vietnam's dramatic and consequential division.
A divided Vietnam and early American involvement. Following French withdrawal, Vietnam was temporarily divided along the 17th parallel. North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, established a communist government. South Vietnam formed a separate government, backed primarily by the United States. This division was intended as temporary, pending future unification elections. These promised elections never occurred, deepening tensions between North and South. The United States, driven by Cold War containment policy, increasingly supported South Vietnam. American officials feared communist expansion would spread throughout Southeast Asia, known as the domino theory. Early American involvement included military advisors, economic aid, and political support. South Vietnamese leadership faced significant internal instability and growing communist insurgency. Gradually, American involvement expanded well beyond initial advisory and financial support.
Escalation, the Gulf of Tonkin, and full-scale war. By the early 1960s, communist insurgents in South Vietnam, called the Viet Cong, grew significantly stronger. The Viet Cong received substantial support and supplies from communist North Vietnam. In 1964, an alleged naval confrontation occurred in the Gulf of Tonkin between American and North Vietnamese forces. This controversial incident prompted the U.S. Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. This resolution granted President Lyndon Johnson broad authority to escalate American military involvement. The United States began sustained bombing campaigns against North Vietnam, known as Operation Rolling Thunder. American combat troops were deployed directly into South Vietnam, dramatically increasing military commitment. By 1968, over 500,000 American troops were stationed in Vietnam. This rapid escalation transformed a limited advisory role into a full-scale, prolonged war. The conflict increasingly became defined by intense combat and mounting American casualties. Guerrilla warfare and the nature of the conflict. Vietnam's dense jungles and difficult terrain significantly complicated conventional American military strategy. Viet Cong forces relied heavily on effective guerrilla warfare tactics and hidden tunnel networks. These extensive tunnel systems allowed communist forces to move undetected and launch surprise attacks. American forces frequently struggled to distinguish combatants from civilian populations. This challenge often resulted in tragic civilian casualties and growing local resentment. The United States employed advanced technology, including helicopters, extensively throughout the conflict. Chemical weapons, including the herbicide Agent Orange, caused severe long-term health and environmental damage. Napalm
an incendiary weapon, caused devastating destruction and significant civilian casualties. Despite overwhelming technological advantages, American forces struggled against determined guerrilla resistance. This unconventional warfare proved extraordinarily difficult for traditional military strategies to overcome.
The Tet Offensive, a turning point. In January 1968, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a massive surprise attack. This coordinated assault, known as the Tet Offensive, targeted numerous cities across South Vietnam. Attacks even reached the American embassy in Saigon, shocking global audiences. Although American and South Vietnamese forces ultimately repelled these attacks militarily, the offensive's scale and boldness severely damaged American confidence in eventual victory. Television coverage brought graphic combat footage directly into American living rooms. Public opinion in the United States shifted dramatically, increasingly questioning the war's purpose. The Tet Offensive is widely regarded as a major turning point in American public perception. Despite military defeat, Communist forces achieved a significant psychological and political victory. This event marked the beginning of declining American public support for continued war efforts.
The war at home, protest and division in America. The Vietnam War became increasingly controversial and divisive within American society. Widespread anti-war protests erupted across college campuses throughout the United States. Many young Americans faced military conscription, intensifying public frustration and resistance. Prominent figures, including musicians and civil rights leaders, publicly opposed the war. Media coverage increasingly highlighted the war's human cost and questionable strategic value. Tragic incidents, such as the Kent State shootings, further inflamed public anger and division. Generational and political divisions deepened significantly across American communities. Returning veterans often faced significant social stigma and inadequate support upon returning home. This growing domestic opposition placed substantial political pressure on American leadership. The war profoundly reshaped American political and social attitudes for decades afterward.
Vietnamization and American withdrawal. President Richard Nixon introduced a policy known as Vietnamization in 1969. This strategy aimed to gradually shift combat responsibilities towards South Vietnamese forces. American troop levels steadily decreased throughout the early 1970s under this policy. Despite troop reductions, intense bombing campaigns continued across North Vietnam and neighboring regions. Secret bombing campaigns extended into neighboring Cambodia and Laos, further widening the conflict. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords formally ended direct American military involvement. This agreement allowed remaining American troops to withdraw from Vietnam entirely. However, fighting between North and South Vietnamese forces continued despite this agreement. South Vietnam, without direct American military support, faced increasing pressure from North Vietnamese forces. This gradual withdrawal set the stage for South Vietnam's eventual collapse.
The fall of Saigon and the war's legacy. In 1975, North Vietnamese forces launched a final, decisive offensive against South Vietnam. South Vietnamese resistance rapidly collapsed under this overwhelming military pressure. On April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, South Vietnam's capital. This dramatic event marked the definitive end of the Vietnam War. Vietnam was subsequently reunified under a single communist government. The war resulted in staggering casualties, including millions of Vietnamese and tens of thousands of Americans. Long-term environmental damage from chemical warfare continued affecting Vietnam for decades afterward. The conflict profoundly influenced American foreign policy and military strategy in subsequent decades. Vietnam veterans eventually received greater recognition, though healing remained a prolonged process. The Vietnam War remains a powerful cautionary symbol
regarding the complexities and costs of foreign military intervention.
The Vietnam War left deep scars on Vietnam's landscape, on American society, and on the world's understanding of modern warfare's limits and costs. Its lessons about intervention, public trust, and the true price of war continue to resonate today. If you enjoyed this journey through the Vietnam War, subscribe for more pivotal moments in history. And let us know in the comments which conflict we should explore next.